South Africa is the world's 12th largest greenhouse gas emitter. Our per capita or per person emissions are higher than countries like China and India. So we've joined the global move towards net zero, the point where humans stop adding to climate heating gases in the atmosphere by 2050.
We're good?
Yes.
We produce between 80 and 90% of our electricity from coal, and energy and heat production account for almost 40% of our total greenhouse emissions. If we're serious about decarbonization, it's the obvious place to start.
We have to be responsible in terms of making sure that we do good to the environment.
𝗀𝗵𝗶𝘀 is an industrialist with dreams of helping revolutionize the country's energy sector.
It is highly possible that you can do good business in an environmentally friendly way.
And, says 𝗀𝗶𝘀, that's what's on offer from a commodity often referred to as the cleanest fossil fuel, natural gas. Compared to coal, it emits about 45% less carbon dioxide, the primary greenhouse gas generated by human activity. Natural gas, according to the brochures, is the ideal partner for renewable sources of energy like wind and solar.
You have sun during the day, you've got wind that predominantly flows at night. So what do you do to balance that? In order for renewables to truly shine, they need an anchor that pieces everything together in order to achieve what we call consistent base load.
Government's Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP, sees gas providing 3,000 megawatts of new electricity capacity, crudely enough to power 2 million homes. The IRP is our electricity generation plan up to 2030, and while some analysts believe it's unlikely we'll reach that gas target, they're not completely writing it off. They argue natural gas could be used for so-called flexible generation, coming on stream when wind and solar aren't available. Does that not fly in the face of our fossil fuel commitments?
The reason why the South African government wants to exploit these resources is because there is a glut of gas that is being discovered on the East Coast, and even in the Karoo and in the Okavango. There are projects popping up everywhere. And it is the kind of mentality, frankly, that you will see everywhere in the world.
It's not a mentality that impresses Dr. Roland Gum of Political Education Institute, the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. The main component of natural gas is methane, a greenhouse gas more potent than CO2, a cleaner fossil fuel in some respects, but a fossil fuel it remains.
They say that it is cleaner, but at the same time, you need to look at the entire footprint.
A lobbyist for climate justice, Dr. Gum is in many ways 𝗀𝗶𝘀's opposite. They represent competing interests in a fast-changing world of other competing interests, a world where economics and the needs of the environment collide.
Climate change is now rapid, widespread, and intense. General Antonio Guterres has this morning.
You've been telling us for over 3 decades of the dangers of allowing the planet to warm. The world listened, but didn't hear.
In early August, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its most up-to-date study on the impact of global warming. It made disturbing reading. The planet is experiencing nearly unprecedented rising temperatures and carbon concentration levels, and humans are, without doubt, the cause. Action is needed to drastically cut emissions, but in a country like South Africa, that is far easier said than done.
If I wanted an easy life, I would have chosen a different career.
𝗂𝗶𝘀 has a tough job on her hands. As Environment Minister, her ambition to help avoid a climate catastrophe has to take into account the many challenges this country is facing. More than 7 million South Africans were without jobs in the first 3 months of this year, a staggering unemployment rate of close to 33%. As it tries to cut emissions, government needs to figure out how not to add tens of thousands of cold chain workers to those stats.
What we have to ensure as we transition is that we can't leave people behind. And we can't say that sections of our society must bear the burden of this transition as opposed to other sections of our society.
Transition is the word used to describe the migration from fossil fuels to low or zero carbon, or more accurately, just transition.
This means that all the people who are going to be laid off, for example, if a coal mine closes down, all the people who live in the town that depends on all the business that comes from the coal mine, all these constituencies need to be taken care of.
Get it wrong in places like the Mpumalanga coal belt, home to the communities most likely to bear the human cost of the energy shift and risk dire consequences. Critical to any just transition is the concept of a social compact, an agreement reached through dialogue and compromise that pays special attention to the communities that will be most impacted by the move away from fossil fuels. Very often, these are people on the margins, and as the events that unfolded on our streets in July demonstrated, ignoring their needs could have devastating consequences. Like so much else in the climate change space, it's a contested idea.
Look, I understand what the concept is trying to achieve. In my mind, what you should be saying is, what are the resources that we have available to us today in order to not destroy our environment, but achieve our growth objectives? We need to achieve high economic growth rates. We need to achieve what we call better wealth for all our citizens.
In principle, South Africa is committed to a just transition, but it is more complicated than that in reality.
And not just because of our fragile economy or our reliance on coal to produce electricity.
Hi, I'm Melissa Fourie, and I'm the Executive Director of the Centre for Environmental Rights.
But because those deciding policy aren't always pulling in the same direction.
Like with all transitions, there is a fundamental tension between those with vested interest in the status quo, in this case, the coal in particular, and those who can see the significant benefits of leaving behind that status quo and moving South Africa to a zero-carbon future.
That's evident in the IRP. It says coal will continue to play a significant role in electricity generation in South Africa in the foreseeable future.
If we agree with mine owners to invest in technologies that make energy cleaner, we're going to have coal in here for the rest of our lives.
While the IRP does aim to substantially reduce our reliance on coal and increase the share of renewables in our energy mix, it also plans 1,500 megawatts of new, clean coal-fired power, enough for about 1 million homes. And while funders increasingly turn their backs on coal, clean or otherwise, Minister 𝗀𝗲𝗃𝗁 appears resolute.
We can switch all those coal power stations and be in darkness and breathe fresh air. What is the point of getting praises while we are starving?
Spare thought for Minister 𝗀𝗃𝗿𝗆, whose job it is to convince international financiers of our commitment to cut emissions and get them to part with their cash.
We're no longer in a situation where climate change is a theory. We are living through the reality of it. We've had terrible drought in our country. We've had raging fires. We've had extreme storms. All of this costs money. Unless there is a predictable and transparent source of financing, not just for mitigation, but also for adaptation, the consequences for developing countries are extremely serious.
And so she's taking up the cause of developing countries and asking rich nations to make good on their pledge for so-called green funding and to commit to a new goal of mobilizing $750 billion a year by 2030. In return, developing countries must show a commitment to decarbonization, and here, South Africa might just have an unexpected ace up its sleeve.
Ironically, South Africa's heavy dependence on coal is actually an plus at this very moment. From a global point of view, being able to remove greenhouse gas emissions from South Africa's coal power stations would result in reductions of carbon dioxide that is globally significant.
Eskom is the country's biggest greenhouse gas emitter, pumping around 213 million tons of CO2 equivalent into the atmosphere every year. Exactly what a world banking on carbon neutrality should be looking for. If it follows through on plans to shut down most of its coal-fired power stations, and move into the renewable space, could Eskom be the spark that ignites a true just transition to a low-carbon future?